Hello, buenos dias, and ahoy. Here you are able to see our presentation of our lecture on the Me Too movement and feminism in the United States. We are the American Center from the USTI Regional Library, and today I'm going to be presenting some information about the Me Too movement, feminism in the United States, and also presenting a couple of books that we have available in our library fund. The first book that we have is called Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. One of the things that I want to present in this presentation is that feminism is not exactly what you probably expect it to be when you hear about feminism. The book Bad Feminist is by a black female author, and she spends this book analyzing what it means for her to be a feminist, how she feels that it's different or challenging, or maybe she doesn't quite fit the definition of a feminist. It's very interesting reading, and I highly recommend you check it out. Otherwise, I would like to mention at the beginning that the Me Too movement as itself has become associated with feminism in general and all accusations of harassment, assault, and rape against women. Especially in the Czech Republic, unfortunately, it has been the object of many jokes. Topics around violence and discrimination against women do not know any borders. They are international. However, the presence of a social movement against this violence and this discrimination is something that seems to have at least started in the United States. As an American woman who identifies as a feminist, I believe I may be able to clarify some things that are a bit ambiguous or may come across as crazy and weird to people on this side of the ocean. At least I can try. How did the Me Too movement begin? Well, the Me Too movement is not the first feminist movement in the Western world. Beginning with suffragettes in Britain and the United States at the turn of the 20th century, and moving gradually into the 1960s and 70s, there gradually grew unrest with the way that women were treated in comparison to men. The explosive nature of the cultural revolutions of the 1960s allowed Americans to see social and collective support for dramatic and demonstrative social statements. What was known as the women's liberation movement began with public bra burnings and publications about aspects of women's rights hitting the market and the press and everywhere that people could be heard. The 1980s saw the beginning of Take Back the Night movements. Take Back the Night was the name given to events organized on college campuses where women marched collectively at night, carrying signs and protesting the fact that women are often unsafe, or made to feel unsafe at least, walking around at night. And in the daytime, slut walks began to take place on city streets. Women wearing all sorts of clothes in different degrees of provocativeness in order to protest the discrimination against women wearing provocative clothing, or the very common myth that she was asking for the violence to happen to her. Look at how she was dressed. Additionally, at the beginning of Donald Trump's campaign for presidency, women's marches began taking place again in earnest for women's rights in general. Women and people who love women all feared that given the conservative position of Donald Trump's party and the position of his fellow party members in the Republican Party, not to mention their own tasteless treatment of women, they began to fear that he would cut back on many policies protecting women's rights. That said, these women were told to not be hysterical and to not be dramatic, that they were overreacting. Well, anyway, the Me Too movement was a bit unconventional as its beginnings. It began as a nonprofit organization founded by Tarana Burke in 2006. With that, I would like to show another book that we have available. This is Tarana Burke's memoir, Unbound. She wrote it about her experiences with sexual violence as a young person, growing up in New York, and with the experiences of other people in her life and in her community. In 2006, she decided to found a nonprofit organization to support and give healing to women and other people who had experienced sexual violence. I read this book in about a day. It's excellent reading, and it's quite fascinating to see how she overcomes so many things. So you can check this book out at the library. All that to say, Tarana Burke wanted to provide support to others who are facing the same problems, and she believed that offering solidarity to victims by basically saying, "Me too," would give them courage and support to address the issues of their trauma. Fast forward to 2017. Alyssa Milano tweeted in response to the Harvey Weinstein assault accusations, "If everyone who has been harassed or assaulted replied #MeToo to this tweet, we might see how big the problem really is." Because Alyssa Milano is a famous actress who happens to be white, her message was retweeted and retweeted and retweeted billions of times. To be honest, I tried to find out how many times this hashtag has shown up, and it could not be counted. It was viral within an hour. From that point, there was such a social media storm and circus that it is hard to define key moments in the movement itself. From the main tweet storm in the Twitterverse to the social media offshoots in individual countries around the globe, it was clear that this is a big topic that's important to many people. But was it just a sea of hysterical, dramatic women who got together to complain? Surely it was just a media storm blown out of proportion, and after all, women can vote and drive and own property and open bank accounts, and they can work. And isn't that enough? I mean, clearly not. This is obviously an issue that's important to a significant chunk of the world's population. As this presentation continues, you will see how much of a problem this part of the world's population wants to address. 3 of the most famous cases in the United States that brought impulse forward to the Me Too movement were the cases of Harvey Weinstein, Brett Kavanaugh, and Brock Turner. Harvey Weinstein is a person who works in Hollywood, and he has been accused of over 150 cases of rape, assault, harassment, molestation, and grooming over many decades. His trial for these crimes is still ongoing. He has been convicted in New Jersey, and his crimes are still being prosecuted in New York and California. The way the justice system works in the United States is that each state has its own court. So the crimes that were committed in each of these different states must be tried individually. Yet altogether, he has, by some accounts, over 200, and certainly on average, over 150 accusations. Brett Kavanaugh was being nominated for the Supreme Court by Donald Trump when a woman who used to work with him came forward and accused him of assaulting her and attempting to rape her when they were in college. Ultimately, he was acquitted. To be honest, having watched the presentation of the evidence in that case, it's understandable why he was acquitted. This is a crime that happened decades ago. The memories of people were shaky from the time, and there was no evidence because obviously it happened many decades ago. But just because the crime happened many decades ago, does that mean that justice obviously doesn't count anymore? Does it mean that we should just let it go? Many, many, many women would say no. Brock Turner was another case in which a first-year university student on the swim team of Stanford University raped an unconscious 22-year-old young woman behind a dumpster on the Stanford University campus on a weekend night. This young man, 19 years old and therefore a legal adult, was caught for the crime that he committed and ultimately went to court for this crime, which would receive nearly 2 years in prison. He was sentenced to 6 months. The judge declared, "This boy has a bright future, and it would be a shame to ruin it." He was released from prison after serving only 3 months of that prison sentence. In light of the media storm and controversy around Me Too, the feminism of today is trying to make itself stand apart from the women's libbers and bra burners and ball busters. The feminism of today is generally understood to mean that women have the same value and dignity as men and ought to be treated as such. Basically, the belief that all people are equal. Many famous men have come forward identifying as feminists by this definition, and this goes to show that problems facing women are not women's problems, but men's problems, and they affect all of us. Lest you think this is just my opinion, I have here a quote from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie from her speech, "We Should All Be Feminists." Feminist: a person who believes in the social, political, and economic equality of the sexes. Some people ask, why the word feminist? Why not just say you are a believer in human rights or something like that? Because that would be dishonest. Feminism is, of course, part of human rights in general. But to choose to use the vague expression human rights is to deny the specific and particular problem of gender. It would be a way of pretending that it was not women who have, for centuries, been excluded. As I mentioned, The Me Too movement has inspired many very famous men to take actions showing their support of feminism and their support of women in general. Here you have many famous actors from LUK wearing t-shirts saying, "This is what a feminist looks like," showing that Sherlock Holmes, superheroes, vampire heartthrobs, and comedians are all capable of being feminists. Furthermore, former athletes and turned actors Terry Crews and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson are known for publicly saying across social media that accepting feminism is manly. Terry Crews is quoted as saying, "I want to be clear that feminism is not saying women are better than men. What it is that we're talking about gender equality, true gender equality." So I'm not the only one who thinks that feminism means all people are equal. That said, while I'm not alone in my position on feminism, there are many common objections that in many ways are fair, certainly deserve to be addressed about the Me Too movement and feminism. The most common misconceptions we hear, or the most common objections that we hear, what about false accusations of rape and sexual violence? Isn't all of this just a media circus? Even women can be perpetrators of sexual violence. Men can be victims too. Aren't we all just making a big deal out of normal things? All of this is part of private life. Why are we bringing domestic, personal problems into the public eye? And backlash movements such as meninism, whataboutism, metoo, and not all men. I'll take each of these objections in turn. But first, I have some quotations from other people who have researched feminism and researched sexual violence against women far more than I have, and not all of them are women. For instance, Mark Green, in his book, The Little Book About Me Too for Men, asserts that there are some men who will insist that the statistics are inflated. Some among us will debate how many millions of rapes are actually taking place. Is it actually 15 million or 10 million? What kind of culture is capable of hosting a debate on rape that's framed in terms of how many millions are actually being raped, instead of how to stop it? In other words, we're worrying about how many individuals are being raped. We're worrying about numbers, whether the numbers are accurate, rather than saying people are being raped. How can we stop people from being raped? Now, imagine 10 women you know personally. Statistically, 2 of them are likely to be rape survivors. Which of those 2? We don't know, now do we? I'm going to make it more uncomfortable. Now imagine any child's classroom. Picture any 10 of those little girls. Which 2 of them will be rape survivors? Are we there yet? Are we feeling a little sick? These backlash movements, like whataboutism, not all men, men too, etc., it just gets us to the point where we accept that men are all just animals. Is that where we want to be? Yes, men face a range of risks and threats in the world. But as a man, I have never had to live in fear that I hold eye contact for too long with a woman I do not know, and she will approach me and start an unwelcome conversation that could lead to abusive behavior. Until all us men, every single one of us, takes responsibility for our public and private behavior, all of the inequities we face will remain secondary issues, held hostage by the men among us who behave like animals instead of human beings. It is important to note, to the objection that women can be perpetrators of sexual violence and men can be victims of sexual violence, that underreporting of that behavior is very much a part of what feminism is trying to address. Niobe Way, quoted by Mark Green, "Boys are taught that their desire for close friendships is girly or gay. This language reinforces daily that women and girls are less. As we tell boys to man up and don't be a sissy or worse, what we are also communicating is don't be female because female is less. We encourage aggressive physical contact as an appropriate mode of physical contact for boys. We turn a blind eye to bullying, even as we then expect boys to work out some gentler mode of sexual contact in their romantic lives. This idea that boys need to be tough and can't express their emotions, and that expressing emotions and being girly is less, this perpetuates toxic relationships with ourselves, boys' toxic relationships with themselves, and toxic relationships amongst ourselves. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie also adds, "We spend too much time teaching girls to worry about what boys think of them. But the reverse is not the case. We don't teach boys to care about being likable. We spend too much time telling girls they cannot be angry or aggressive or tough, which is bad enough. But then we turn around and either praise or excuse men for the same reasons." All over the world, there are so many magazine articles and books telling women what to do, how to be, and not to be in order to attract or please men. There are far fewer guides for men about pleasing women. Florence Given writes in her book, Women Don't Owe You Pretty, you see a woman walking down the street in a miniskirt, and your immediate thought is, she should be dressing more carefully. Flip it around and say, her clothes aren't the problem. The problem is rapists. 80% of all rape perpetrators are women, are people whom the victim knows and probably trusts. The thing is, sexual violence is so endemic that many people don't even realize they have committed it. I'd like to address also the question of domestic violence. Victims are robbed of their power and independence, often over months and years. They worry that their children will be taken away. They are deprived of the money they need to leave. They don't have any support network because their partner has driven their friends and family away. But in cases of domestic violence, often we hear is, why didn't the victim just leave? Why couldn't she just get away? To say that there is fault on both sides is to forget that there is a power dynamic. Yes, some women do kill men in domestic homicide, but often when you dig deeper into the nuance, you find that these women were abused for such a long period of time that they snapped, or the incident was in self-defense. This quotation comes from this book, which we also have available in our library here in the Ústí region. Difficult Women, A History of Feminism in 11 Fights. This book addresses the history and arguments surrounding abortion, gay marriage, divorce, infidelity, and sexual violence. I highly recommend reading it. Altogether, we've seen that many people are raped and many people are the victims of domestic violence. Here's some ways that you can address the problem if someone that you know tells you that they have experienced sexual violence. Victims often hear words like this. I'm sorry it's like this, but this thing happens to a lot of people. You're not alone. Are you sure they meant it that way? If you toughen up a bit, these things won't bother you as much. Oh, that happened a long time ago. You have to get over this for your own good. You guys have been on good terms since then, haven't you? You've not had any other problems. Rather than any of those things, which can come across as extremely condescending or abrasive to a victim, try saying something like this. I'm so sorry you went through that. I hear what you're saying. That sounds terrible. It must have been really terrible. How do you want me to listen now? How can I support you? Do you want me to sit and listen to you, or do you want me to give you some advice? Here are some more ways that you can react in a compassionate way. Many times, victims hear words when they finally do open up or make an effort to address their situation. They hear things like, did you really say no? What were you wearing? Did you try to fight back? Why didn't you report it? Why did you report it? What did you think you will gain by reporting it? You could do that person a lot of damage by reporting them. Are you sure it was rape? Are you sure he heard you say no? Rather than any of those things, try something like this. Thank you for trusting me by telling me this. It must have been really hard for you to admit this. I believe you. How can I support you? However you decide to resolve this, I support you. You didn't deserve this. It wasn't your fault. Many of the things that people hear, if they've been victimized and finally open up to someone, have to do with one of these common myths about sexual violence. Oftentimes we hear the main motive in rape is sexual desire. This is not the case. Rape has nothing to do with sex. It has everything to do with power. Raped persons are responsible for their rape. The perpetrator of a rape is a unique pathological individual. He has something wrong. Violence and aggression are just part of sex. Most reported rapes are fabricated. Most accusations are false. Basically, victims want to be raped. Only dishonest, dishonorable women are raped. The perpetrator of a rape is a man unknown to the victim, and rape usually takes the form of an assault. The woman should just let herself be raped in order to avoid further injury or death. Only women and children are raped, never men. Rapists are always men. Orgasm, erection, ejaculation, these reactions don't belong to rape. If any one of these happens, it can't have really been rape. The victim only has themselves to blame. A friend would never try something like this. No one would ever dare try anything on a tough lady. I repeat, these are common myths. They've been perpetuated in our society, and they do not reflect reality. This slide is in Czech. I have chosen to leave it in Czech so that those who want to familiarize themselves with Czech law in the Czech Republic have access to it. Basically, I will summarize in English for those who do not read Czech. The definition of rape and attempted rape is any sort of sexual contact, lying together, or any sort of sexual contact that seems to be leading to rape, or that may be associated with rape. This means that many activities that could be considered as foreplay or something like that, if it's not consensual on both sides, it counts as attempted rape. And the perpetrator can get between 2 and 5 years in prison. Here I have, again in Czech, for those in the Czech Republic who want to read more about what is relevant to them in their country, some facts and statistics about sexual violence in the Czech Republic. In the Czech Republic, there are reported 1 to 2 rapes daily. It is assumed that the actual number is much higher, because again, this only mentions reported rapes. It doesn't mention anything that was not reported. Of these, only 8% of cases, which is rape, in which it led to a family, 8% of those cases are followed up on, and of cases that occur in a family or a romantic relationship, only 3% of cases are reported and followed up on. The worldwide estimate is that 1 in 4 women will be subjected to sexual violence during her lifetime. Hopefully, I don't need to go too much into this, but the side effects of not only penetrative rape, but any form of sexual assault, including attempted rape, can have any of these following outcomes. The victim may experience claustrophobia, chronic pain, irregular menstrual cycles that are not related to pregnancy. The victim may experience an unplanned pregnancy or some sexually transmitted infection. Drastic changes in appetite and metabolism, weight gain or weight loss. Stomach problems, such as irritable bowel syndrome, heartburn or ulcers. Distractibility, irritability, inability to concentrate, strong, perhaps overblown emotional reactions. Avoiding situations that remind victims of the attack. Flashbacks. Intimacy and relationship issues. Increased blood pressure and heart problems. Chronic and acute depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies. This is why, if we take into account that 1 out of 4 women has experienced or will experience sexual violence in her lifetime, and maybe is struggling with some of these after effects from it, to have a man then say, not all men, or men can be victims too, or what about this case, or aren't most cases falsified? This is why such objections can come across as extremely insensitive. Why don't more women report violence? There are evidentiary problems with obtaining evidence. As I mentioned, there are many cases of assault that are technically crimes but do not leave any evidence that can be collected for a rape kit. Additionally, if a victim doesn't go right away to the police to report it, the odds of them being able to get any evidence that's viable or usable are quite low. There is what's called the subjective burden of criminal proceedings, which means that going to the police, filing a report, giving the interviews, then potentially going to court, talking with a lawyer, causing the victim to relive the attack and a traumatic experience many times over. This causes significant additional stress, in addition to overcoming the stress of the original traumatic event. Furthermore, there is secondary victimization and stigmatization of the victim. For instance, according to the true rape myth, a decent woman cannot be raped because she leads an orderly life that excludes risky situations. Rape is assumed to be a sneaky, sudden ambush of a random victim. Basically, a woman is walking by herself, a man jumps out from behind a dumpster, drags her away, and rapes her. We don't often account for the fact that most cases of sexual violence are with people that the victim knows, in settings that are familiar to them. According to still another myth, the victim often provokes the perpetrator, apparently through her appearance, behavior, naivety, or something like that. These are very serious concerns about why sexual violence often goes unreported. Florence Given had mentioned earlier that we ought to flip the narrative, and instead of saying, what was the woman wearing when she was raped, why did the man think that he could rape that woman? So here I would like to give you the best rape prevention tips according to Sarah Silverman. This will probably ring true with many young women who were 10 years old when their mothers first taught them to carry their keys in their fist so that they could attack someone if someone attacked them. Here are 10 rape prevention tips. Don't put drugs in women's drinks. When you see a woman walking by herself, leave her alone. If you pull over in your car to help a woman whose car has broken down, remember not to rape her. If you are in an elevator and a woman gets in, don't rape her. When you encounter a woman who is asleep, the safest course of action is to not rape her. Never creep into a woman's home through an unlocked door or window, or spring out at her from behind parked cars, or rape her. Remember, people go to laundry rooms to do their laundry. Do not attempt to molest someone who is alone in a laundry room. Use the buddy system. If it is inconvenient for you to stop yourself from raping women, ask a trusted friend to accompany you at all times. Carry a rape whistle. If you find that you are about to rape someone, blow the whistle until someone comes to stop you. Don't forget, honesty is the best policy. When asking a woman out on a date, don't pretend that you are interested in her as a person. Tell her straight up that you expect to be raping her later. If you don't communicate your intentions, the woman may take it as a sign that you do not plan to rape her. Sarah Silverman is a comedian in the United States. She is also an outspoken survivor of sexual assault. And she has prepared these rape prevention tips as part of her way to deal with her trauma. It's not intended to offend any men or accuse all men of being rapists. Of course not all men are rapists. However, this is intended to show the burden that is placed on women normally and how unfair this burden would seem if it were switched and applied to men, who are in fact, in many cases, the perpetrators of rape, though of course not all cases. Teď dám tuto informaci v češtině. Ty 4 stránky jsou bohaté zdroje informace o znásilnění, o aktuální situaci v České republice a mají ještě mnoho možností na získání pomoc. Obzvlášť pro oběti. Ty stránky mají informace a můžou vás propojit s poradenství, buď to legální, co se týče trestní činy, nebo psychologické podpory. Moc doporučím, jestli se cítíte, že chtěli byste s někým o něčem promluvit, moc doporučím tyto stránky. In closing, listen to others when they tell you what happened. Use common sense when evaluating what someone says. Of course, there are false accusations. Of course, people try to get famous by sharing gossip and garbage about other people. However, in most cases, that is not the way it actually went. If you are in a position where you can use your power to take advantage of someone else, don't. Treat everyone as equal. Don't rape others. In fact, don't even try. Just don't do it. Don't harass or assault others. Again, just don't even try. If you made mistakes in the past, you have the chance to correct it in the present. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention during this difficult topic. Again, listen to others, talk about problems if you're having them, and know that you are not alone. Keep reading, my friends. Nerds conquer the world.